Debbie Hindis, and I, along with Anne Burkett, to the extent that she can, will be moderating today's premier panel session. I know it's premier because it's the first and the only panel session of this conference. Woohoo! Yeah, there we go.
Check.
Thank you. And the topic, of course, is how do you design your next game? We have an amazing set of panelists here, and the format will be as follows. Each of them will very briefly introduce themselves, and then Anne will be asking a series of questions, allowing each of the speakers to talk a little bit about their philosophy and maybe some of their key lessons. And then we'll have some lightning rounds, some questions from me, and hopefully some questions from the audience as well. So to get us started, I'll ask Brad Muir to say just a few words about himself.
Hey, I'm Brad. This is working? Hey, thanks for coming. So I'm Brad. I've been at DoubleFine for about 9 years. Before that, I worked on that game called Alter Echo. If you've heard of that, I'll buy you a drink. I swear to God. But yeah, I was a programmer and then a designer, and Iron Brigade was my first outing as a lead. And I'm still there, so that's good.
Great.
That's it. Was that brief enough? All right.
Yes, that qualifies as an elevator pitch. Thank you. Fred, now you have a standard to live up to.
Hey, my name is Fred Marcus. I'm currently studio creative director at LudusLabs, and I've been in the industry for too many years. I've worked on a few titles before for Ubisoft and Rockstar and whatever. So there you go. There's more you can do. But anyway.
Great.
It's going to be a great talk.
Now we get into the Randy part of this panel.
They're going to call me Wrangle. I make games and program them and design them and everything else. Even before there were a lot of computer games, I was making games. So that's me.
Great. Thank you.
I'm the other Randy, Randy Mosiondz. I'm with Cryptic Studios. I've been there for about 7.5 years now. Worked on City of Heroes, Champions Online, and currently Neverwinter. So massive multiplayer online role-playing games.
Great. Stephanie.
I'm Stephanie Morgan. I've been producing and designing video games for the last decade or so, really focusing on multiplayer and social games in mobile. Started out at Glue, was studio director at Hands On Mobile, was at NG Moko. Right now I'm a little bit of an odd person out because I'm actually working on a live social app, but we're a bunch of ex-game makers who are working to bring game philosophies to make video chatting fun. Still designing like it's a game. That's me.
Great.
I've done that before.
And I am a bit of a reener because I'm actually in education, not games themselves. I'm from Cogswell College, and part of why I'm here is because we have just launched what we believe is the first Master of Entrepreneurship and Innovation for the creative fields, which includes a specialization in game. So at this point, I will turn this over to Anne Burkett. Would you like to come up?
Okay, I'm going to try to delve a little bit into each one of your heads and how you come up with your next game. And I'm going to start with you, Brad. And right now, you are living the life of the independent, and everyone. It is kind of the year of DoubleFine, if anything.
Kickstarter's nice. I don't know if anyone actually put in for that, but thanks. Yeah? Yeah! Thank you.
That's exciting. So when I talk with Brad, he has a few different ways he comes up with games, and let's talk about one of them. Please explain what a game mashup is.
Yeah, a lot of my career has been doing genre mashups, where it's like you just deconstruct parts from different games into like subsystems or sub-mechanics. try to take what you like, leave what you don't like, and put them together to try to make something that is it's original, but it also has some familiarity. Like people that like those mechanics, they're seeing them again, but they're seeing them in a new way, combined with something that they might also like, hopefully.
So you're trying to be original and still cheat a little bit, so that people recognize something in there.
Definitely cheating a little bit. Like there's a lot of that. I don't know, like the standing on the shoulders of giants kind of thing that happens. Where it's like there've been so many great games, and just like leveraging that a little bit, not trying to reinvent the wheel completely, I think is really important.
So what do you think of the benefits, and then you can get to the drawbacks, because it sounds kind of scary too.
Just like avoiding cloning stuff that's already there is great. Like it's really that's really awesome. It can lead to something innovative sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you can actually make something that feels like it's its own, kind of like the first of its kind. I think there are some great examples out of there. Like if you see the guys that made something like Dota. Like they actually, they're basically adding like RPG mechanics into an RTS, and they're producing this weird new thing, and now there's a whole MOBA genre. It's like they pretty much created that by mashing up different things into the same, into an existing genre. And I think that's like you get to sort of be the leader when you make your own little subgenre that way.
Okay, so that all sounds wonderful and pretty, but I can also see the train wrecks too.
I think it's pretty easy to screw it up. One of the worst things is that like you try to get the best of both worlds, but you oftentimes end up getting the worst of both worlds. So it's like all the things that people hate from those two genres that you're trying to put together ends up with, you get all those things, and the things that they really like, sometimes it's like miscalculated, and the things that you really liked about it, they actually hate, and you end up with this sort of like Frankenstein's monster that is really shitty. So that's pretty bad.
So given that it can go off into Frankenstein's monster, which can be a good game, but people like horror, or it.
I'm going to start pitching that now. It's my shitty Frankenstein's monster game.
But given that, how do you tell when it's gelling, or when it's just going off into never?
That's really hard. I mean, I think a lot of like Kleenex testing and like early focus testing. Focus testing is sort of like a broad, weird term. You don't have to be a corporation to like really do focus testing. You can just grab people that have never really seen the game before and then watch them play it. Like the test of just watching somebody play and standing over them and not talking to them. It's really hard to like not actually like this is something that you should do if you're like making games. Like have somebody play your game and watch them play and don't say anything no matter how much you want to. Just like keep your mouth shut. It's really, really hard. See, Fred knows what I'm talking about.
It's so important.
And it's like, because you will want to actually, point things out and explain things and like, oh, there's no UI for this isn't working, blah, 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 blah. You'll want to just like have this real sort of like diary of the mouth, like telling them, explaining everything. That's a really gross term, sorry. But yeah, it's like, I think that is really important when you're trying to like do something that's a little bit new, of like combining these things together. Like, you just have to watch people play it and see what's working and see what isn't working. And then there's also, I think the other piece of good advice is like killing your babies. That's another really gross term, but killing your babies is really important. Like this is something that they'll talk about when you're testing your game, when you're like working on it. You might get really attached to a certain feature, and then see, Fred, you totally got my back. This is the best. Thanks. I like this nonverbal support you're giving me. It's excellent. But yeah, like, you'll get really attached to a certain feature. It'll be like, oh, this is going to be so good. Like, this part of it is going to be, it's going to be the best. And then you watch people play it, and you'll have like 3, 4, 5 focus tests in a row. Everybody at the end, after they play, they're like, yeah, I hated this thing. This was the worst. Why did you do this? And then you just have to, cut it, just kill it, and move on with your life.
Okay,
and it's hard. It's really hard because it's like, I don't know, like when you're creating something, you're like kind of putting yourself out there, you're putting your own ideas out there, and then when they don't work, it's like, it's really shitty and painful, and nobody likes that part where they have to slaughter their children. I don't know why it's called that. I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense, but it's
because
weird.
it's painful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now, given that, and we've heard that side of it, and that you can get emotionally invested in this, which you wouldn't do in a clone. Why would you attempt a risk that? And this is something we discussed. So why would you attempt a risky genre mashup when a well-executed clones are raking it in? And no, I don't want you guys to also start throwing something at me. I know you think this, so that's why I'm asking this question.
I mean, for me, it's like so I can look at myself in the mirror and like sleep well at night. I know that sounds weird, but like it's really gratifying to try to do something different and try to be different and actually have it work. That's awesome. But yeah, I think that you also don't have to spend time answering the question like, well, how are we different from the game that we're very similar to? I think you can waste a lot of time and energy on that subject throughout the development of a game, and that just sort of sucks. Whereas when you're, when you're doing some mashup thing and you're exploring new mechanics, that's pretty much answered up front. You never really have to ask yourself that because the game is different enough from what's out there.
Okay, and just briefly, can you share a little bit about the Amnesia Fortnite process, too?
Oh, yeah, that's a thing that we do at DoubleFine. We kind of talk about it a lot, but it's like our 2-week internal game jam, and it's really awesome. We kind of like try to like break the company up into a bunch of teams, and we all work on brand new ideas, and then a lot of our recent games have come out of that process. I think it's awesome. Like the whole game jam process lets you be experimental at pretty low cost. And you can sometimes surprise yourself with what comes out of it. It's awesome.
Okay, and I'd like to move on, but I would like to circle back to that question with the other panelist, which is, he kind of gave an answer to the clone question, which was living with himself, and it was more psychological based, although all of you have to face a bottom line. So I would love to hear from the other panelists on that, and welcome any kind of you can just wildly disagree or even bravely get up there and say, we cloned and we made money, yay. So for Stephanie, I know that you guys seem to be researchers, or when you were at NG Mocha, you were you did some market research and you checked into genres before you jumped in.
Yeah, definitely. That was actually true at NG Mocha, at Hands On at Glue, I think in mobile in general, because a lot of your marketing ground, the battle territory is around the App Store. It's around this limited visibility for your product in front of other people. And there's not a lot of really effective ways you can spend marketing dollars to promote your game. You're usually on very, very low marketing budgets. And the number one thing you can do is get visibility on the App Store or on the deck. And one of the best strategies for sort of approaching that is to look at different categories that are sort of underserved, where there is actually opportunity to come in with something that is very unique, is really the most sort of special thing in that space, and dominate that space. So if you sort of see that there's an opportunity in puzzle or in word or in some category where maybe there has been sort of even like one dominant player for a long time, but there's not a lot of new influx of new games, creating something that can appear in the top 10 for that category can very much give you a lot of visibility to sort of create this interesting kind of self-fulfilling cycle, which pushes you further and further and further up, so that eventually you can appear in the top 10 across all games or the top 10 across all apps. And kind of thinking about that would inform the types of games that we would create, not necessarily in terms of thinking very literally like, okay, you're going to create a word game. That means it must be a very standard sort of word game, but it would inform the initial framework for how you would think about a game. And it doesn't necessarily preclude the idea of mashing up or creating something that is very original. It's not about cloning, although I do think that there's a very interesting discussion that could be had around cloning originally, and that perhaps mashups maybe sort of fall into that. But being able to, again, thinking especially like as independent game makers, or as people who are trying to, you're investing your heart and soul in this, and you want it to succeed both in terms of the fact that, yes, you emotionally want it to succeed, but you also are running a business, and you do need to make money from it. Really thinking about how you're going to get that product in front of people and get them to enjoy it and play it is a key part of it, and genre is a piece of that.
So you said something that just sounded so easy when you were doing it, but how many of you out there have ever tried to identify an underserved category? Hands. Done that? Tried to, okay. How'd it go? I think it's probably a lot harder. But you've been very successful at it many times, not just once. So that's one of the reasons why hey, you want to tell us your secret?
I'm not sure that there's a super secret, but it is really combining a lot of information together. It also won't work if you make a shitty game. Like, it really doesn't matter if you're like, wow, there is this amazing opportunity in RPG and all I've got to do is like throw something out there and it's going to stick. No.
Let me know if you figure that out. If you figure out the underserved market where I can just make a shitty game and like and win and get a bunch of money. Like, if anybody knows, come,
yeah,
I'll buy you a drink for that too.
But then you wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Last I heard.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Maybe you just asleep a little bit.
But you have to think about like just looking and saying, okay, there's not a lot of interesting games in X, Y, or Z category. That's going to change a lot. Identifying the opportunity is going to be informed by a bunch of different things. What platform it is that you're going after, that's going to radically change how you might approach it and what the opportunities are. And it's not going to be the same across every platform. Even in mobile, it's not going to be the same from Android to iPhone. The second thing you need to think about is how the demographic for the genre that you've identified as an opportunity actually fits into the broader demographic, again, for the platform that you're on. So you might say, like, hey, there's this really amazing opportunity to make games for 6-year-olds, and there's just not a lot of people making a lot of money like in kids' games, but we know there's a lot of kids, so we can go and do that. But if you're putting that on an iPhone in like 2009, you're probably not going to make a lot of money because there's not a lot of 6-year-olds with iPhones, and there weren't a lot of parents giving their kids their iPhones at that point. So you're kind of thinking about how the target demographic for the genre fits into the target demographic for the platform, and then also looking at how each of those demographics actually spend money. Like, this also kind of taps into how you're planning to monetize your game, which does feed into how you design it. And there's different ways to approach it to make it work really well depending on what your monetization model is. And if you end up mismatching those things, like you're creating a free-to-play game for a group of people who really are offended by that core concept and don't want to have free-to-play like FPS, it's not going to work no matter how well you do it. So it's about kind of taking a whole bunch of disparate data and really blending them together, and then using that to guide, kind of create a framework for how you approach the design, but also not letting it dictate the design. Like, I think it's a mistake to decide everything based off of this faux empirical market data, because if you do that, you're going to end up with something that isn't interesting, isn't going to succeed, and will just feel generic. I hope that was helpful.
It was.
There's a lot of information there, and in some ways goes against the grain. I personally, analytics were really cool when they first came out, but now they seem so abused. It's like people are asking for them to think for you.
I think the mistake is not using information. Like, information is definitely power, and if you're sort of constructing within a vacuum, you aren't always going to be able to make the right choices, right? Even focus the usability testing, like putting your game in people's hands, that's a type of market research, that's a type of information. It's understanding. At the end of the day, you're trying to, all of this business framework is really just blending down to, is this fucking fun? And is somebody going to be willing to pay for it, right? That is the super simple nugget. And fun is such an abstract and kind of esoteric term, and there's so much emotion and so much sort of completely intangible elements tied to it that having useful information to help kind of guide you, not to dictate it. I think that's the big problem, is where people are like, oh, well, we have, we need to do X, Y, and Z because the data says we need to do X, Y, and Z. Again, that's where you end up at something really terrible and generic. But if you have analytics that indicate, that people aren't being able to play your game for longer than 2 minutes, you're like losing all of your players after 2 minutes, that is very useful information that you can sort of live iterate on and adjust on the fly, and suddenly you realize, okay, the tuning is too difficult, or the instructions aren't there, or you know what, those first 2 minutes actually just really suck, and that's why everybody is leaving, so we kind of need to rethink that entire first-time user experience to make it awesome, because they're not making to minute 5 where they suddenly go, oh, that's the amazing thing, and want to play forever. So it can be very, very, very useful. It just needs to be used within it needs to be used as sort of smartly and as a guidance, as opposed to this abstract dictator that I think you see in a lot of games right now.
Yeah, maybe that's why they're so dull. So, Frederic, and by the way, if you ever get a chance to see a Frederic speech, one of the few easy answers in life is just yes, just go. He's wonderful, and has so much knowledge of the game industry. Frederic, in the process, I mean, what kind of process do you tend to draw on, and do you think that do you think making your next game is really platform dependent?
Well, as I say in my incredible presentation, I think you have to make stuff, right? And not talk about them and not write about them, but you have to build stuff. So, of course, it's platform dependent, because ultimately your mechanics and what people are going to touch, whether it's a joystick or a touch screen or a mouse, is hardware dependent. So, yes, it is, to me, completely platform dependent. I don't know if you want me to go further, because I can last for a very long time.
And given that, and because we're hearing from people on different platforms, I mean, you're over there with DoubleFine, you're kind of representing the strong independence, and there we've got mobile, and now, Fred, you've done so much in console.
Yeah, but it doesn't change. I mean, ultimately, it's the same, again, like principle all over the place. I mean, I was thinking, I wrote down, like, it's interesting because on one side we think of, and I'll try to remember the question. On one side we think of games as art, an art form, and at the same time we keep talking about monetization. And again, when you're an artist, you're usually starving, because most of the time, days and nights, when you start for your first 10 years, you basically start to learn how to play your instrument. And in order to start to play your instrument properly and understand your craft on whatever platform, I can link to the question.
Nice throwback there. You got it.
Yeah, you basically, and it's going to be interesting because every art form clones. Every art form clones before you start to do your own stuff. It wouldn't come to you in your mind to start going down the street, play a guitar for the first time without ever try to actually play a Beatles song or anything like that at home, right? So cloning to sell is not necessarily interesting, but cloning to practice and know your craft is not only interesting, it's critical. Or else it just means that you think that it's going to come to you, out of thin air, and it doesn't, right? So yes, it is incredibly platform dependent. Depending on what you want to do, what game you're interested in, what you like, you better spend days and nights actually redoing it to understand why it clicks, why it works. Again, I think the game industry is probably the only one that believes that you can be a chef in a restaurant just by eating food at restaurants. I can make games because I play games, or believes that you can be a movie director because you go to movies, right? Without ever holding a camera or anything like that. That won't happen, right? So, yes, you have to understand what is your platform, how it works. You have to have your hands dirty, and depending on the platform, it will change dramatically.
Tied into that, what
Wow.
you just said, is that people need to play games.
Yeah, but it doesn't make you understand how games are made. That's, it's like, you can, again, like, you have to understand that, for example, if you play a Farmville game or something like that, right? It's hacking on your brain, guys, okay? So just the visual can overwhelm you to actually understand what's really going on. If you go to a movie class, it's going to show you movies, it's going to show you like what they do with a camera. Without you would never imagine what's going on in that movie camera-wise. You don't know what's going on. You've never experienced it. You've never carried a camera. So just by redoing it, you'll understand actually what's going on. You'll start to actually feel the details and why it works. But just looking at it doesn't tell you how it's done. Like going to a restaurant and tasting food. Yeah, you can tell what is good and what is not good. It's not going to tell you how long it needs to stay on the oven, or when it's going to burn, or how it tastes like before you put that spice in it, and how much spice you need to put on it.
Is that like because games are interactive, like that people feel like they're more of a participant, like they know more? I don't know. That's an interesting. Like I've never really. I'm just throwing that out there because I agree with you that
it's
whole.
Interesting because you're also, if we talk about, I'm sorry, maybe it's going away. But when you're eating food, it's the same way. You're still interacting with your food and you're tasting it, right? I just think that it's still hard for me to call it an industry, even if it generates billion, because it's probably one of the only industry that doesn't have R&D, financed. Where yes, you do game jams and stuff like that, but there's no like 1/3 of your company budget going into R&D. I mean, it's the case now in mobile because it's way faster and stuff like that.
I think that the other part of that is, besides not having a budget for R&D, which I've found fascinating for the 20-plus years I've been in the video game industry, is that it was important for me when I was learning and doing the craft to actually make games and throw them away and make games and throw them away. And it was part of my process was to say that every single weekend there was going to be a new game for me and my friends to play. And these were tabletop games. And I would design from the moment that we played on a Friday night to the next Friday night a completely new game for them to play. And then when I got into computers and realized that I really wanted to do this on computers, I would program games in 24 hours, long before, we're talking Apple II, so people hadn't invented the name Game Jam. But the challenge was, what could you do in a game in 24 hours and know that I was going to throw that away? Because what it was the learning process for me to get better and better at game design.
So I just love the fact that this particular panel is mature enough to discuss these issues in a mature way, because sometimes I'm afraid to bring them up because you get almost a religious reaction. And people turn off their brains and they do a jihad. Excuse me, oh my God, I'm going to...
There's a riot starting in Libya right now.
Outside the Fairmont right now. I'm so sorry. I did not mean to offend anyone or anyone's religion. But
It's
they
okay.
People get very adamant and turn off the rational side and just go for the emotions there. And I think it was fabulous what Fred said, bringing it back to, if any of you have gone to art school, anything, yeah, when you made art, you practiced, you looked at the hits and the masters and you copied them, and that wasn't wrong. And we've made it sort of wrong in our industry, I think, because of the anger of people commercializing that, and Fred is kind of drawing a line there and saying, well, practicing and cloning, you ought to be doing that as much as possible, but then go ahead and do something, push it a little farther, maybe do the mashup, and get some originality and get some of you in it. If that's one approach of doing it, there's others. So I don't know. I'm just really thrilled. Thank you. Somebody brought a rational statement to the cloning table. Okay, so.
Do you want it to be more irrational?
No, we can go.
We can totally just drive this right off the rails from here if you want.
All right.
That's fine.
Don't say jihad. You can say Voldemort, but not jihad.
So you were going to drive it off the rails? Go for it. What are you going to do?
No,
you're not.
I really
He's
wasn't.
being facetious.
I think that's an awesome piece of. I always give that advice to like new programmers that are in school, just go make Tetris, because I feel like a lot of them always they have these grand ambitions. They're like, oh, I've got this idea, and it's like Halo, but it's an MMO, and I'm working on it right now. And it's like, so who's working on it with you? Nobody.
Isn't it maybe part of like the fallout from it actually being an industry, like from it actually being a formally structured sort of business space where people sort of think of it as a job versus a craft?
I have my theory on this. My theory is that not so long ago for you guys, you could make
did you just say before you guys?
Yeah. They look like kids. They're like kids for me.
Not all of them. That guy's not a kid.
Yeah,
that guy's not a kid right there.
It's okay. He doesn't have white hair. Anyway, at the beginning, you could make a game by yourself and do the art and the design and the coding and all that kind of stuff. And then the hardware started to ramp up, and then we started to hire artists and stuff like that to actually do your game, and the cost was going up. And as the cost is going up, people start to freak out to give you money. If you're just going to be an artist or someone that's kind of like creative on quote and is going to say, yeah, I'm going to do a game about kind of this. Do you have $1 million to do this game? So what we started to do is hire people that were way more structured, because humans love structure. They prefer structure from chaos. Unfortunately, creative processes are chaotic. So we started to hire people that can actually write very nice documents again, very structured, and have their ideas all in place. And then suddenly, as the cost was going up, game designers that are, again, as I said in my speech, are actually document makers and not game makers, started to come out, and a whole new generation of guys, especially in the console industry, came out that have absolutely no clue whatsoever of how games are made, how do you filter controls to make it fun, how camera works, and all that kind of things, how core mechanics actually evolve, and all that kind of stuff, but are incredible at writing documents. So in the end, the best generation of designers that's going to come out in the next few years are actually the kids that are doing iOS titles by themselves, going through the suffering and the iteration and the loss of ego that's going to allow them to actually create new stuff and the future generations of titles. But there's an entire generation of guys that have been making money without having any idea of what they are doing. Good for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
It won't last. Be warned.
Interesting. All right, Randy.
Sorry.
Now you have been in a lot of different roles in the industry, all the way from the beginning consoles to casual games, and you have lived as a consultant too. And so you're dealing with the realities of that, which are different constraints again. So tell us what it's like to design a game, based on an existing brand or someone else's idea.
We got two Randys, and we both were ears perked up trying to hear which one she was referring to.
I am sorry, this is
Wrangle. The things that I've gotten a chance to work on, I've worked on a lot of brands, and by a lot of brands, I mean I started out working on Star Trek: The Next Generation. I worked on Lord of the Rings. I worked on Lego, worked on Spider-Man and SpongeBob, and the list goes on and on and on. But what you really have to do when you do a branded game is get into the head of the people who are the fans of that brand. And the reason I became lead designer on Star Trek: The Next Generation is because I was the only person on the team who actually watched the program. Now, it helped that I was also a good game designer, but I was the only person who actually watched the show. And that is typical of people who work on branded games, is that they don't necessarily like the brand that they're working on. And that is a big problem. And I think that likewise, it goes back to casual games, which I've made games. The Lego project was for preschoolers. How could me, a guy who's old gray hair and loves to play role-playing games, make an educational product for preschoolers? Well, I did some of the focus testing. I put mirrors out and watched kids while they played with the game. But I had to sit back and actually remember what it was like to play with Legos when I was a kid. Same thing, not that I shop in dress shops or do that, but I made dress shop hop.
We know the truth.
And I had to get into the mind of young ladies who might want to make their own dress shop. So I went and talked to people. I do too. I went to talk to people who do that and learned what I had to learn to make a good game mechanic that would address the dress shop making mechanic for young women who wanted to be a dress shop hop.
You just have to be pro, right, Randy? You just have to be a damn professional.
You have to practice.
You have to be good at it. And I think that the thing is, you put your head in the space and you say, what is it about that space? And I remember working on Lord of the Rings. It was a horrible experience because they wanted to make Onimusha over and over and over again. And I'm like going, but Onimusha only has one character, and they had a sort of a man crush on Aragorn, and they thought that they really just wanted to make the Aragorn game. And I was astonished. I said, it's called the Fellowship of the Ring on purpose, and I was told, well, who would want to ever play a character that was the gray-bearded old man, or those freakish dwarves and elves, or what were those things, the hobbits? And I'm like going, oh my gosh, that's the game. Yeah. I'm sorry, that is the game. I'd rather make Gauntlet again and let you pick which of your favorite characters than to play I have a crush on the manly Aragorn and just do that over and over again.
There's nothing wrong with that, Randy. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay.
So, needless to say, after that experience in console games, I did go off and start making casual games and getting into the heads of players again and getting back to doing what I love, which is making great games and having fun doing it. But I do say that having made as many games as I have, and I counted it again the other day, 86 games in my career, I could honestly say that there is very little about platforms or genres that I haven't tried. And the fun that I have in doing it is that to this day, I still enjoy sitting down and rolling dice with my friends every Friday night if I can, and trying it again. And there's some of you in this room who've actually played at my game table, so there you go.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and please don't hurt me with it because I don't know the answer. What the heck is SMAF?
What the heck is SMAF? About 12 years ago, Andrew Lecker from Mind Control gave a talk on SMAF, and it's called Small, Fast, and Fun, or as we say now, smaller, faster, funner. Although that always comes up as a misspell in your Word doc. The idea is very, very similar to what Fred was talking in his talk. It's building the core mechanic, and then building the prototype, and then building what the industry is now calling the minimal viable product, and then shipping that minimal viable product and watching what happens and saying, oh, we got to tune it based on Stephanie's data that she's collecting on all this. And that process is smaller, faster, funner. You build games and you throw the stuff away that doesn't work as quickly as you possibly can. And that's core to every single game I've made. And when I heard Andrew talk about it, I said, now I've got a name. And I built Pronto Games, the studio I ran, off of the idea that SMAF was the way to make games. And now, 12 years later, I still believe that it's the best way to make games. And thankfully, I saw Fred's talk today, and I agree with him because it confirms it all.
I think it not only makes like more fun games, but it also allows you as a game maker to make more cost-effective games and to be less beholden to being afraid of experimenting, because you can do really crazy shit that comes into your head and see how if it works or not, and then throw it away with minimal cost and risk for yourself.
I remember working on a very serious first-person shooter, and because we were prototyping, we put jump in, but we forgot to check if you were still standing on the ground. So you could jump, and then you were in the air, and then you could jump again, and you were getting higher, and you could jump again, and you were getting higher. And I'm like, this is going in the final product, whatever we have to do to make this work, because this is awesome. It really is awesome. And that experience was typical of every emergent piece of game design that you do as you're building products, as you go, oh, what did I just invent by doing this? And you say something that's really fun. Let's do it again.
Happy accidents.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of killing your babies.
It's just throwing out the bathwater. You keep the baby.
It's drinking
right.
the bathwater.
The other Randy, who's been very quiet and is also
It's an image.
kind of living the life many of us would love to, or that many people out of college tend to want to do, which is to actually work on that MMORPG. And not just work on it with one guy, you know. And you're with Cryptic Studios,
Yep.
who's been putting out a lot of interesting new games, and then also the Foundry and things like that. I would love to know what your process is in creating online MMORPGs.
Sure. Well, it's one thing you have to understand about MMORPGs are the scope and scale of them. When you have to approach the overall design of it extremely carefully, because you're looking at about 3 to 5 years development cycle, and then a lifetime after that of 5+ years. So you're designing for almost a decade of lifestyle or life on a game. So you have to do all of your research very carefully, because that's a lot of time, a lot of investment. And your publisher, you have to basically convince your publisher that you can make that work as well. So, like Stephanie was saying, there's a lot of market research that has to go into that, right? Which way the industry is trending, what things you can market, and just what also, and at the end of the day, what will also be fun in the whole course of it. So. It depends, of course, if you're working on a brand like an IP, or if you're trying to come up with something new. The MMORPG game space is changing a lot over the last few years. Subscription models are going away, and so you have to really kind of figure out, whether you want a branded IP, whether you want to come up with something original, and where does that actually fit in the overall scheme of things. If you're working with original IP, you have to make sure that it has a wide marketability. Like a lot of the, for example, one of the things that Cryptic Studios has done is Star Trek Online. Star Trek has been around since the 60s, and it's got a massive fan base. And it's great that we have such an instantly recognizable IP to work with. We kind of inherited it. There was initially another company that was working on a Star Trek Online game, and when that company went under, we kind of inherited the license, but we had to deliver on their production schedule after they'd already burned a few years of the original schedule. So the initial release on Star Trek, for example, was on a very tight window, and we've had to really kind of develop and engineer it, from that state. But it's been around. It's one of Cryptic's top games right now. Actually, in Perfect World Entertainment, which is their publisher, it's top game right now overall, and it's. So yes, long and short of things is that you have to do. It's a lot of careful planning and risk estimation as part of it. If you're working on original IP, you have to really kind of figure out what a lot of people are willing to invest in And it's where innovation comes in. When World of Warcraft came out, many years ago, it was a fantasy genre with elves and dwarves, and something that you've seen time and time again in the previous iterations, like EverQuest, then before Ultima Online, etc. But what they did was made it more accessible. They made things shorter, more fun, less of a grind, and they just kept on building on a lot of that expertise. So they innovated by making things more accessible, right? And that's another way you just innovate, is right, improve the gameplay, improve what players are getting out of the whole thing, right? If you make that an enjoyable experience, that is innovation in itself. Now, moving to free-to-play markets is because, like as I mentioned before, subscription models are going a little bit to the wayside now. You have to figure out what is accessible to the most amount of people, because like all our games right now they're no cost to play. You just download it and play it. So how do you make your money, right? Well, it's all free to play and monetization. So having a monetization strategy is a huge part of what you're planning for in a game, right? You still have to have like a good solid core gameplay mechanic, but you have to be able to give players what they want. Like if they're enjoying the game, they invest lots of hours into it. You have to give them things that they want to improve their overall experience.
Well, it seems like that in some ways that would be one of the toughest markets to be in, because it's a very competitive right now, and it's hard to innovate because you're talking about huge budgets and huge teams. So I was wondering if you could talk really briefly about one thing that did seem rather innovative in Neverwinter, which was the Foundry Forge.
Oh, yes, Foundry. Yes.
Yeah,
so,
and how you guys pulled that off, and what you think what do you think you're doing there?
So one of the things we're doing, we did the initial thing. We originally planned it for City of Heroes, but we really came up with our our real model for the Cryptic Studios engine was a thing called the Foundry. And if you've played Star Trek Online, but there's the Foundry toolset, which allows users to create their own content and contribute it to the overall game system, right? So this gives a lot of player license, right? They can actually get into the game, create their own. They have basically a whole tool set to work with, and you're essentially giving license to the player to create their own part of the world. So, and we've gotten like a lot of great response for that, because there are people who who play the Star Trek Online game who have been fans for like decades. And this gives them an opportunity to, be a game designer in their own right. It's more of a storyteller role, though, because for the most part, they're mainly dealing with a lot of set assets, but they can tell their own stories. And it's got a user rating system, so people who play it can rate it, etc. And they contribute to the ongoing game. And that's a big part of it. Is because when you're dealing with games on such a large life cycle, you develop it with your fan base over time. So things that people enjoy, you can build more of, and players can contribute their own part with the Foundry system. We've been developing it more with the Neverwinter product line. If you're not familiar, Neverwinter is the Dungeons and Dragons license in the Forgotten Realms. We're currently looking at a release next year, and the Foundry is going to be a big featured part of that. And we've basically expanded out the functionality of the Foundry so players can create their own dungeons, create their own stories, NPCs, environments. Like any people who've played pen and paper tabletop games, they could take on the role of the dungeon master, create their own dungeons, populate them, etc. And this contributes to the overall, extends the overall world, because one of the hardest things to make and keep on going in a mass multiplayer game is content, right? Content is your kind of your lifeblood, right? It is, and that's why as part of monetization, when we're talking about that, is that we don't want to charge for any content in the game. We want players to be invested in the world, and if they enjoy it, then they'll naturally spend any things to improve their experience. And
Thank you,
the same thing is with the Foundry content authors. We don't want to bar any access to them. We don't want to sell toolkits. We don't want to sell assets to them. We want to give them the ability to create their own worlds and by extension, expand the amount of content that's available in the game. So,
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I had a quick question on just thinking, like, one of the tricky things for me when dealing with user-generated content within a game is really how you fit it into the whole ecosystem in an effective way without completely fucking up what you have designed.
Right. We're still baiting the Foundry right now. We've actually got a lot of people from the old Neverwinter Nights modding community, in addition to a lot of people who have done a lot of the Star Trek Foundry content, and we're getting them to come up with help us come up with different methods to communicate that. And one of the things we were talking about, integration into the rest of the game world, is have a rating system in place where players, like, it's a peer review rating system. And once it's fairly highly rated, the bartenders that you come into taverns in the world actually start offering these types of highly rated content as part of it. So it becomes a seamless part of the player experience. They wander around the world, they come across these things. All of a sudden, they're playing an adventure that was created by a user. So.
Oh, that's awesome, and the users love that.
Yeah, definitely.
Talking about unmoderated user-generated content. Daniel James had a great product called World, and I remember the day I was playing it. No. We're generating some content, yes. But there was this great moment because you could make anything and build anything, that one of the users realized that their character could be a single pixel stretched to the size of the screen. So now you couldn't see anything else that was on the screen. Well, that was great, and it sold like hotcakes, and everybody became a giant pixel that was the size of the screen. So now nothing else mattered. You couldn't see any other games. You couldn't see the chats. You couldn't see anything else that was going on. But one guy figured out the really brilliant way to get around this. He made his giant pixel blink at a rate that caused seizures. So now people were in the rooms as giant blinking pixels that caused seizures, and there would be 50 to 100 people in that room, all as giant blinking cursors that caused seizures. And I asked Daniel, was he ever going to learn to build a moderation tool? And he never did. So there you go.
That also goes, the user-generated content stuff goes back to Fred's point about, like, practicing your craft. A lot of times people, like kids that want to be designers, they, like, can't program. Like, I don't know, maybe, like, they don't want to. I don't want to say they're dumb. Maybe they just don't want to. But they really want to be designers, and they have great ideas. It's like mod tools and things like that are really great ways of like practicing your design craft as you get in there. That's another pro tip for any of you people that are want to be designers.
In fact, that's one of the big things that when people apply to Cryptic to become content designers, we ask them if they've done any actual hands-on work, and
no, I haven't.
and we kind of point them as like, have you used any modding tools and everything, and then we point them to our Foundry tools and say, hey, you want to design something, you want to be a designer, show you can make content. We have these free tools you can download and make stuff with. So, and that actually, we've hired some really good people because of that. So.
No excuse.
I hate to have to cut off this fascinating conversation, but I do believe there is another session scheduled here in, about 4 minutes.
Darn.
We have a break. Oh, okay. So we have a little bit of flexibility.
We have 4.5 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, it's important from an analytical point of view that we be precise. What I would like to do is ask those of you who have burning questions to come to the front of the room near Anne, so that when you ask them, everybody can hear them. And meanwhile, I have a question for a lightning round for the panelists, and that means really brief answers.
Hands on our buzzers.
What is
I'm ready.
The one piece of advice that you most want game designers to remember as they walk out of this session?
Yes.
No.
Brad.
What did you say, Brad?
Yes, I did.
Oh, I think like tying into the just like go do it. Like, the no excuses thing that Fred said. I don't know if anyone heard that. He said no excuses. Like, there's so many ways for you to just, like, I don't know. I feel like now is the best time ever to just, like, go make a game. And you could even, like, make a bunch of money doing it. with iOS and all that other stuff. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, just go make games. And also, don't be afraid to like fail, because you're gonna fail a lot. It's gonna be awesome, and we'll laugh. But like, you know, once you get through that stuff, like, you will start making awesome shit, and then that's cool, because then we'll play it. We'll stop laughing then, I promise. That's it.
Fred.
Yes.
Okay.
Everything he says.
Randy.
SMAF. There you go.
Randy.
Another Randy. Be passionate about your craft, but be practical about it too.
Stephanie.
I would say, despite the fact that I was talking so much about monetization, like in genre, don't get stuck in ruts. Push yourself, and don't also get stuck in mechanics. I actually, we didn't get to really talk about this, but I think designing purely around mechanics leads to kind of generic things. Like, think about what the core compulsion loop is of the game, like how each action feeds into another one and like spirals onto each other to create something fun. Don't just be like, I'm gonna make a sword fighting game. That might not just be fun just because swords seem fun. Think about what it is that you're really trying to accomplish.
That's super awesome advice.
That's the fail part.
That's like working at DoubleFine with Tim Schafer. That guy is pretty creative. That's been the biggest thing I've learned there. Like, I'm a very mechanics-focused kind of designer, but like paying attention to the theme of the game and making sure that you work that into the mechanics and that they go hand in hand rather than like sometimes they can work against each other or whatever. Like, yeah, making sure there's like a good harmony between the overall high-level theme of the game and the low-level mechanics of the game it's really hard.
It's super,
I have no
super
tips
hard,
for that,
and
but
as he said,
just
you
like
will
do
fail,
it.
but when you
Yeah,
succeed, it'll
but
rock.
when you do it, it's awesome.
It's
So.
as much what we didn't put into the game
Yeah.
that's important as what we did put into the game.
Man.
Yeah, that's
True that.
actually another awesome thing. I feel like so many young designers come in, they are like what you were saying, Brad, or you, Fred, like, it's going to be like Halo meets like Diablo meets Final Fantasy VII.
On skates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, man.
And you're like,
And it's got PvP.
Okay. We have time for one or two questions from the audience. Who has a burning question? Stand up and be counted.
You
Okay.
can come use my microphone if you want. It works pretty good. Okay, what is your name? I'm going to interview you, Ellie.
All right. My question is, have you ever been asked to design a game for everyone, and how do you deal with that?
yes.
It's actually not as hard as you think. You start by drawing a list across the top of a matrix that has every player type that you want to address. And then down the side, you address every single one of their purchasing behaviors. And this is something I teach about free-to-play games. Their purchasing behaviors on the side. So are they impulse buyers? Do they buy to one-up their friends, whatever? And then you make sure that there's a mechanic and something for them to purchase for every single one of those. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't just jumble all that together. You actually have to have a game in there, but that's a way that you can address your market and say that I've actually solved that problem for you. Thank you.
And then you make your feature list, and then your producer shoots you. Like,
Well, no, there's sort of something to that, but if you don't have like once you get them in, but if you actually are trying to like design a game that is for everyone, I think if with that as your top line directive, you're not going to have a clear point of view. You're not going to have any sort of like deep voice, which is actually going to be important to give the game personality and give the game fun. You need to have a point of view that maybe isn't alienating to like everyone, but you need to be coming from a very specific direction and have all aspects of the game feed into that. And then you layer in exactly what he's talking about so that every person you funnel in has a great time and you can monetize, et cetera.
I feel like you're probably going to train wreck it, though, if you're like, we want this game to be all things to all people.
Remember
like,
that
there's no focus there, and I think it's just gonna be bad times for everyone, and your producer will shoot you. So you're
Yes.
dead in this story anyway. It doesn't matter.
And remember,
Disneyland is
Genre,
fun for
category.
everybody when they go, not just the kids and not just the grandparents, right? Everybody.
There have to be people that hate
depends.
Disneyland, though, right? Like, I'm not going to claim to be one of them, but like, there are people out there that it's not for them.
Having 3 kids, I can tell you, it depends on the age of your kids. Because when they are, it's very early on, it's definitely not fun for you at all.
Like, what if you're OCD or like a shut-in or something? Like, Disneyland's not for you. Like, it's totally not. So I don't know. Yeah, I think that's a dangerous, like, I would slap that person. Unless they had money that I needed to make a game, then I wouldn't slap that person. But like, I would want to slap that person if they were like, hey, can you just like make a game for everyone? Yes.
Yeah.
That's Noah Falstein's advice. Take the money first, then once the check is cleared, slap them.
Take cash only.
That's really good.
You know, I was going to have more audience questions, but that somehow seems like the perfect note to end on. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists and to invite everybody to meet outside of this room so the next group can get set up. Well, I'm sure our panelists will be happy to continue the conversation and taking your questions. And thanks to Anne for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.